On the morning of August 6, 1945, at precisely 8:15 a.m., the city of Hiroshima in southern Japan is already awake. The summer air hangs heavy over the streets. The sky above the city is almost completely clear, a rare moment of calm after years of war. Tramcars move along their routes. Factory workers begin another day of labor. Children walk toward schools. Soldiers prepare for their duties. Across the city, around 350,000 people continue with ordinary routines, unaware that history is moving towards them at extraordinary speed. High above Hiroshima, almost 10 kilometers above the ground, a silver aircraft approaches through the bright morning sky. It is an American B-29 Superfortress named Enola Gay. Inside the aircraft is a weapon unlike anything ever used before in warfare. It is not a larger bomb, not a more powerful version of existing explosives, but a completely new force created from the structure of the atom itself. The crew members aboard the aircraft know they are carrying a weapon of enormous significance. They have trained for months for this mission. Below them, however, the people of Hiroshima see only a distant aircraft crossing the sky. Wartime air raids have become a familiar part of life, but on this morning there is no immediate warning. There is no expectation that this day will become a dividing line in human history. Then, in a fraction of a second, everything changes. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb known as Little Boy detonates approximately 600 meters above the city. A flash brighter than the sun tears across Hiroshima. A massive wave of heat, pressure, and radiation expands outward. Buildings collapse. Streets disappear beneath a storm of fire and debris. Thousands of people are killed instantly, while many more suffer injuries that will shape the rest of their lives. The explosion lasts only moments, but its consequences will continue for generations. The attack on Hiroshima was not simply another event in the Second World War. It represented the arrival of a new age, one in which humanity had unlocked the energy contained within the smallest pieces of matter and transformed it into a weapon capable of destroying an entire city. But the road to that morning did not begin in Japan. It began years earlier, inside laboratories across Europe and America, as scientists uncovered secrets hidden deep within the atom. What followed was a race against time, a struggle between discovery and destruction, and one of the most ambitious scientific projects in history. The story of Hiroshima is not only the story of a bomb. It is the story of fear, innovation, war, sacrifice, and a moment when human knowledge reached a point from which there was no return. By 1945, the Second World War had already become the deadliest conflict humanity had ever experienced. Europe had been devastated. Nazi Germany had surrendered in May, but the war in the Pacific continued with brutal intensity. Japan's military leadership showed no willingness to accept unconditional surrender, and Allied planners expected that defeating Japan through invasion could cost enormous numbers of lives. The United States had already demonstrated the destructive power of conventional bombing. Cities such as Tokyo had suffered devastating air raids. On the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, a firebombing campaign against Tokyo killed tens of thousands of civilians and destroyed large areas of the city. Yet even attacks of this scale did not force Japan to surrender. American military leaders faced a difficult calculation. An invasion of the Japanese home islands, planned under the name Operation Downfall, was expected to involve hundreds of thousands of Allied troops. Japanese military preparations suggested that civilians and soldiers alike could be mobilized for a final defense. The United States also possessed a weapon that had been developed in complete secrecy. The Manhattan Project was launched in 1942 after scientists warned Allied governments that Nazi Germany might be attempting to build an atomic weapon. The project brought together some of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century, including physicists who had helped uncover the principles behind nuclear fission. In December 1938, German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann had discovered evidence that uranium atoms could split into smaller elements. Physicists such as Lisa Meitner and Otto Frisch later explained the process of nuclear fission, showing that this splitting released enormous amounts of energy. The discovery changed the nature of warfare. Traditional explosives relied on chemical reactions between atoms. Nuclear weapons relied on changes inside the atoms themselves. The difference was immense. A small amount of uranium could potentially release energy equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosives. The challenge was turning scientific theory into a working weapon. Scientists needed to obtain enough highly enriched uranium or plutonium to create a self-sustaining chain reaction. Engineers had to design enormous industrial facilities capable of producing these materials. Security teams had to protect the project from enemy intelligence. Thousands of workers were involved, many of whom did not fully understand the purpose of the facilities where they worked. At its peak, the Manhattan Project employed more than 130,000 people across multiple locations in the United States. The total cost reached nearly $2 billion, an extraordinary investment during wartime. Major facilities were established at places such as Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where uranium enrichment took place, and Hanford, Washington, where plutonium production facilities were built. The Central Scientific Laboratory was located at Los Alamos, New Mexico, under the leadership of physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. The project operated under intense secrecy. Even senior government officials were sometimes unaware of its full purpose. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was informed, and after his death in April 1945, President Harry S. Truman learned about the program only after taking office. The first successful test of an atomic weapon occurred on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert. Known as the Trinity Test, the explosion produced a fireball and shockwave that demonstrated the devastating power of nuclear energy. For the scientists who witnessed it, the moment confirmed years of difficult work. It also created a new and uncomfortable reality. The weapon they had built was no longer theoretical. It was ready to be used. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima was the result of a complex engineering effort designed to solve a problem that had once seemed impossible. The weapon had to be reliable enough for combat, compact enough to be carried by an aircraft, and powerful enough to achieve the strategic goal expected by military planners. The aircraft chosen for the mission was the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, one of the most advanced bombers of the war. Unlike earlier bombers, it was designed for high-altitude missions with pressurized crew compartments, long-range capability, and advanced systems. The Enola Gay was commanded by Colonel Paul Tibbets of the United States Army Air Forces. The mission involved careful planning, including weather observations, navigation, and the selection of the target. Hiroshima had been chosen partly because it was an important military center and had not yet suffered the widespread destruction experienced by other Japanese cities. American planners wanted to demonstrate the effect of the new weapon on a relatively intact target. The bomb itself, Little Boy, used uranium-235. It was approximately 3 meters long and weighed about 4 tons. Unlike the later plutonium-based Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki, Little Boy used a gun-type design in which 2 pieces of uranium were rapidly forced together to create a nuclear reaction. The design was considered sufficiently reliable that it was not tested before combat use. When Little Boy fell from the aircraft, it took around 44 seconds to reach the planned detonation height. In that brief moment, Hiroshima continued to exist as it had for centuries. Then the nuclear age began. The explosion over Hiroshima revealed a destructive force that few people on Earth had ever imagined. In the seconds after detonation, a fireball formed at the center of the blast, reaching temperatures estimated at several million degrees Celsius. The intense heat traveled outward, igniting materials across the city and causing severe burns to people far from the immediate center of the explosion. A powerful shock wave followed. Moving faster than the speed of sound, it struck buildings, bridges, and infrastructure with overwhelming force. Wooden homes, which made up much of Hiroshima's urban landscape, offered little resistance. Thousands of structures collapsed almost instantly. turning streets into fields of broken timber, glass, and dust. The destruction was not limited to what could be seen. Nuclear radiation created a new category of suffering. People who survived the initial blast were exposed to invisible forces that would continue affecting their bodies long after the smoke had cleared. Historians estimate that approximately 70,000 people were killed immediately or within the first few months following the bombing, although exact numbers remain uncertain. The total death toll from injuries, burns, and radiation-related illnesses eventually reached around 140,000 by the end of 1945, according to many historical estimates. Among the dead were soldiers, factory workers, elderly residents, and thousands of children. Hiroshima was not only a military target, it was a living city filled with ordinary people whose lives were permanently altered in a single moment. The aftermath revealed scenes unlike anything previously experienced in warfare. Survivors, later known as hibakusha, described a city transformed almost instantly. Fires burned across Hiroshima. Thick smoke covered the streets. Injured people wandered through the ruins, searching for relatives, medical assistance, or any sign of safety. Hospitals that had survived were overwhelmed. Many doctors and nurses were among the casualties. Medical supplies were limited, and the nature of the injuries was unfamiliar. Some survivors who appeared relatively unharmed at first later became seriously ill because of radiation exposure. The attack also created a psychological shock around the world. Military planners had expected a powerful weapon, but the scale of destruction demonstrated that warfare had entered an entirely new era. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, another atomic bomb was used against Japan. This time, the target was Nagasaki, where a plutonium-based weapon known as Fat Man was dropped by the B-29 bomber Boxcar. The two attacks, combined with the Soviet Union's declaration of war against Japan on August 8, placed enormous pressure on the Japanese government. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio address, bringing the Second World War to an end. The decision to use atomic bombs remains one of the most debated events in modern history. Supporters of the decision argued that the weapons forced a rapid surrender and avoided a costly invasion of Japan that could have resulted in hundreds of thousands of military and civilian deaths. Critics argue that Japan was already weakened and that alternative methods, including a demonstration explosion or continued conventional pressure, should have been considered. Historians continue to debate the military necessity, diplomatic motivations, and ethical consequences surrounding the decision. What is certain is that Hiroshima changed the world permanently. The development of the atomic bomb represented one of the greatest scientific achievements of the 20th century. But it also revealed the terrifying consequences of applying that knowledge to warfare. The scientists who created the weapon had worked under the pressure of a global conflict. Many believed they were racing against Nazi Germany's potential nuclear program. Once Germany surrendered, the question became whether the weapon should still be used against Japan. Within the Manhattan Project itself, opinions varied. Some scientists supported demonstrating the bomb's power before using it against a populated area. Others believed that using it could bring the war to an end more quickly and save lives. The final decision belonged to President Truman and his advisors. After Hiroshima, the world entered a period defined by nuclear competition. The United States initially held a monopoly on atomic weapons, but that advantage did not last. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested its own atomic bomb, beginning a nuclear arms race that would shape international politics for decades. The weapons themselves also evolved rapidly. Early atomic bombs relied on nuclear fission, splitting heavy atoms such as uranium and plutonium. Later, thermonuclear weapons used fusion, combining lighter atoms and producing far greater explosive power. Compared with the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, later nuclear weapons were vastly more powerful. Little Boy had an explosive yield of approximately 15 kilotons of TNT. Some Cold War-era hydrogen bombs reached yields thousands of times greater. Yet the significance of Hiroshima was not measured only by explosive power. It represented the moment when nuclear weapons moved from scientific theory into human history. The bomb demonstrated the importance of industrial capacity, scientific research, and technological organization. The Manhattan Project had shown that governments could mobilize enormous resources to achieve a single objective. This approach influenced future military research programs. The same combination of scientists, engineers, government funding, and industrial production would later shape developments in space exploration, computing, medicine, and energy. If you're enjoying this journey through history, subscribing genuinely helps us continue bringing remarkable true stories like this to the channel. The atomic bomb also changed military strategy. Before Hiroshima, victory in war was often measured through territory captured, armies defeated, and resources controlled. After 1945, nations had to consider the possibility that a conflict between major powers could lead to catastrophic destruction within minutes. The concept of deterrence became central to international relations. Countries developed nuclear arsenals not only to fight wars, but to prevent them through the threat of overwhelming retaliation. The United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and later China developed their own nuclear capabilities. International agreements were created to limit the spread of nuclear weapons and reduce the risk of accidental conflict. However, the existence of these weapons created a permanent tension. Humanity had gained the ability to harness a force that could provide energy and scientific progress, while also possessing the ability to cause unimaginable destruction. The story of Hiroshima also cannot be separated from the human experiences of survivors. For decades, Hibakusha shared their memories in an effort to document what happened and warn future generations. Their testimonies described not only the physical suffering caused by the bombing, but also the long-term emotional consequences of surviving such an event. Many survivors faced illness, discrimination, and psychological trauma. Some carried visible injuries, while others suffered from health problems that appeared years later. Despite these hardships, many Hibakusha became advocates for peace and nuclear disarmament. Their experiences became part of the historical record, ensuring that the human consequences of nuclear warfare were not reduced to statistics alone. Today, Hiroshima stands as both a city and a symbol. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial, including the remains of the former Industrial Promotion Hall, now known as the Atomic Bomb Dome, preserves the memory of the destruction. Museums, archives, and survivor testimonies continue to provide evidence of what happened on August 6, 1945. The physical remains are reminders that history is not only written through decisions made by leaders and governments. It is also preserved through the experiences of ordinary people who lived through extraordinary moments. The atomic bomb was created in laboratories, assembled in factories, and delivered by aircraft. But its true impact was felt by human beings in streets, homes, schools, and hospitals. The morning that began like any other became the moment when the world discovered that a single weapon could alter the course of civilization. The atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima was unlike any weapon used before it, but it did not emerge in isolation. It was part of a wider technological race that defined the Second World War, a conflict where nations competed not only with soldiers and factories, but with science itself. During the war, Germany, Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and Japan all invested in advanced military research. Each nation faced different challenges, possessed different resources, and developed different approaches to solving the problems of modern warfare. Nazi Germany had begun investigating nuclear technology through the German Nuclear Energy Project, often referred to as the Uranverein, or Uranium Club. German scientists, including physicists such as Werner Heisenberg, explored the possibility of nuclear reactions, but the program never reached the stage of producing a usable atomic weapon. Historians continue to debate how close Germany actually came to developing such a weapon. The evidence suggests that Germany lacked the industrial capacity, resources, and coordinated effort required to build a functioning atomic bomb before its defeat in 1945. The United States succeeded where Germany did not because of the enormous scale of the Manhattan Project. American industry provided resources on an unprecedented level. Facilities at Oak Ridge and Hanford were among the largest industrial projects ever attempted, while Los Alamos brought together leading scientists from several countries. The contrast was significant. Germany's nuclear effort remained fragmented, while the American program combined scientific research, military organization, and industrial production into one enormous operation. Japan also conducted research into nuclear physics during the war, including programs connected to the Japanese Imperial Army and Navy. However, these efforts were limited by shortages of uranium, industrial difficulties, and the devastating impact of war on Japan's economy. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, maintained an interest in nuclear research but accelerated its efforts after learning about the American program. Through intelligence operations and its own scientific work, the Soviet Union successfully tested an atomic bomb in 1949. The development of Hiroshima's bomb also differed from other weapons of the Second World War because of its strategic purpose. Conventional weapons, including the largest bombs used in Europe and Asia, depended on explosive materials such as TNT. Their destructive power was measured in thousands of kilograms or tons. Nuclear weapons changed that measurement completely. Little Boy produced an explosion equivalent to approximately 15,000 tons of TNT. Yet, a single aircraft carrying one bomb could achieve destruction that previously required hundreds of aircraft and thousands of explosives. This difference transformed military planning. The ability to destroy a major city with one weapon changed ideas about air power, defense, and future conflicts. However, the atomic bomb was not perfect. Little Boy was an early design, and its uranium-based mechanism was relatively inefficient compared with later nuclear weapons. A significant amount of the uranium did not undergo fission before the weapon exploded. Later, nuclear weapons became smaller, more powerful, and more efficient. Delivery systems also improved. Bombers were eventually joined by intercontinental missiles and submarine-launched weapons, allowing nuclear powers to strike targets across the globe. The atomic age therefore became not only a story of increasing destructive capability, but also a story of technological competition. The immediate impact of Hiroshima was the end of the Second World War, but its wider consequences reached far beyond 1945. The bombing influenced global diplomacy, military strategy, scientific research, and public consciousness. Governments understood that future wars between major powers could no longer be considered ordinary conflicts. The Cold War developed around this new reality. The United States and Soviet Union avoided direct military confrontation partly because both possessed nuclear weapons capable of causing devastating losses. This created a dangerous balance known as mutually assured destruction. The idea was simple but frightening. If one nuclear power launched an attack, the other could respond with overwhelming force. For decades, the world lived under this possibility. Nuclear weapons also influenced engineering and scientific development. The same nuclear research that created weapons eventually contributed to nuclear energy programs, medical treatments, and scientific discoveries. Researchers developed methods using radioactive materials for cancer treatment, medical imaging, and industrial applications. Nuclear physics became a major field of scientific advancement. Yet the destructive side of nuclear technology remained impossible to ignore. The memory of Hiroshima shaped international efforts to prevent nuclear war. The creation of organizations and agreements aimed to reduce nuclear risks reflected the fear that another use of such weapons could have consequences far beyond a single battlefield. The city itself became a place of remembrance. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park preserves locations connected to the bombing, while the atomic bomb dome remains as one of the few structures left standing near the explosion's center. Museums preserve artifacts recovered from the ruins, damaged clothing, melted objects, stopped watches, and personal belongings that belong to people whose lives ended or changed forever on that morning. These objects provide a human connection to history. They show that behind every strategic decision, every military calculation, and every technological achievement were individuals with families, hopes, and ordinary lives. The story of Hiroshima is therefore not simply about the success of a weapon. It is about the consequences of human choices.